the young man pushed his scrap tire for several thousand meters. He arrived at a legendary repair shop, hoping that the technician here could help him, and somehow work a miracle to fix his newly bought second-hand tire. However, the technician froze for 10 seconds upon seeing the tire. This tire wasn't just flat, it looked like it had exploded. The long crack on the tire resembled a massive canyon split. This was a true test of both skill and bravery. Even so, the technician confidently claimed it could be restored to its original state. This wasn't just a display of skill, but a testament to his unyielding spirit. First, he used a scraper to cut along the cracked edge, exposing the internal fabric layer, while smoothing the edge to make it easier to glue later. After completing the initial cut, the technician began removing excess rubber from the edges, forming a bevel. This would allow for a better fit during the stitching, increasing safety. Next, he used a slow-speed grinder to roughen the bevel. This roughness would ensure the patch adhered more securely. Of course, just grinding the outside wasn't enough. The inside had to be roughened too. Only then could the repaired area stand the test of time. Next came the repetitive, meticulous task of grinding the whole tire. After grinding, the large crack caused the tire to lose its shape. So one technician held the crack open, while the other inserted a rod for support. But even with this, the crack wouldn't align. Reluctantly, the technician had no choice but to stand the tire upright and move it next to another tire to find another solution. However, repairing such a large crack couldn't be done simply with glue, so the only option was to stitch it with nylon thread. Luckily, the technician had worked as a tailor for 3 years, which is why his stitching skills were so solid. He expertly used large needles, stitching one line at a time. His technique was so steady it had become second nature. Then came the careful stitching along the crack. As the nylon thread wove through, the crack began to close, piece by piece, like a long dragon winding along the tire's surface. At that moment, the technician's skill shone through. Of course, just stitching wouldn't work, air would leak out later. So the technician cut half of a scrapped inner tube, and drew a horizontal line in the middle. He then split the inner tube along that line. This cut inner tube would become the material for the tire repair. Next, he placed the inner tube inside the tire to see if it covered the cracks. Once satisfied, he used the scraper to trim the patch and remove excess material. He then checked it again inside the tire to see how the cuts fit. The size and shape of the patch were perfect, filling the cracks flawlessly. This technician wasn't just boasting about his skills. After applying a layer of black tire glue inside, he didn't rush to place the patch on. Instead, he grabbed the grinder to carefully roughen the surface of the patch. This roughening increased the contact area and friction with the glue, ensuring the patch would adhere securely to the tire's interior. With the roughened surface, he could now apply a layer of glue. This tire glue was made by mixing raw rubber sheets with other chemicals. Since the crack was so large, he had to apply a thick layer of glue. Every detail had to be carefully addressed. Of course, the stitched seams also had to be covered with glue. This, too, required careful application. Once the glue dried, the technician could begin sticking the pre-cut rubber patches over the cracks. These rubber patches were carefully cut to fit the size and shape of the cracks. Only then could they perfectly match the contours of the tire. Both the inner and outer sides had to be covered. This required great attention to detail and plenty of patience. Once the inner and outer layers were covered with rubber patches, the pre-cut patch was carefully placed inside the tire. During the patching process, it was crucial to make sure the patch completely covered the cracks, and that it was level with the rest of the tire's surface. Only once every part was perfectly covered could the vulcanization process begin. Next, the technician moved the repaired tire into a special room. Inside, the technician had been waiting for this moment. Together, they placed the tire into the vulcanization machine. Then, sandbags and wooden blocks were used to hold the tire down, ensuring it stayed still and didn't shift or deform during vulcanization. After securing it, the gas stove was lit, and the burner was placed into the vulcanization machine, where high temperatures would slowly soften the rubber patches, bonding them tightly to the tire. This process would take 2 hours of heating to complete the vulcanization. Once done, the tire was removed from the machine. At first, they thought the inner tube would completely bond with the tire, but it only served to hold the patch in place, so only a single layer of rubber was needed to repair the tire. It was a simple fix, but it worked perfectly. You couldn't even tell the tire had such a huge crack. In fact, if you didn't look closely, you wouldn't even know it had been repaired. It looked brand new. The two technicians couldn't help but give each other a thumbs up. This tire would last another 20 years without a problem. Stay tuned for more exciting videos on my channel.